Today we're going to look at uncovering root causes of everyday complexity. Before we get started, I'll ask everybody on the webinar to raise their hands so that I can ensure that I'm either not deafening them or they can actually hear me. So if the audio is okay, if I could ask people just to let me know. Okay, perfect. It looks like everyone can just about hear me, which is a so today we're going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes giving you a whistle-stop tour of this content, and then at the end of the session we will spend 5 minutes answering some frequently asked questions that we get on this topic. There's a chat field, and you're able to ask questions and leave comments as we go through the session. And if we don't get a chance to answer your question, then we will come back to you directly after the webinar. So my name is Adam Howe. I am one of the founders of STOP. We simplify organizations by removing unnecessary internal complexity. Today we're going to focus on a toolkit to identify the real root causes. So they're really clear. This is about teaching leaders and managers in organizations to diagnose the complexity they see in the organization themselves as part of a leadership or management development program. This is not an in-depth diagnosis of organizational complexity, which is something that we help organizations with, but that is a very different toolkit to the one that we are going to move through today. Also, we're not going to duplicate content. So on the last webinar, we covered some of the latest research data points on why everyday complexity is a big problem in organizations. On the previous webinar, we did that. So how many emails people are getting, the increase in management reporting, then have a look at that webinar, and there's plenty of data points in that session which we'll cover that content. So we introduced this last time, the discover, disrupt, and deliver process. Today we're going to cover the first two steps in the process, which are both within discover. Those are creating a hit list, which is identifying ideas and opportunities for where your organization could be simpler. We're asking people to look at the work they're doing in their organization by the stuff that really matters, the high value stuff that creates competitive difference and gets individuals and teams recognized and promoted. The necessary activity, and this is activity that you need to do, and the clue's in the name, but it doesn't really matter from a kind of competitive perspective. So that's stuff that we should be looking to do as simply and as low effort as possible. And then the third bucket is unnecessary activity, and this is activity that an organization doesn't need to do at all. It might have needed to for a period of time, but actually the organization has outgrown that. And then digging for roots. Once we've identified what could be simpler through the lens I've just gone through in the hit list, we need to get to what is really causing the complexity problem. We definitely don't want to fix the wrong things, or similarly, we don't want to fix the right things in the wrong way. We thought it would be quite useful to very quickly share some common mistakes that we've seen when diagnosing everyday complexity. Unguided, the majority of organizations and their people do not diagnose complexity properly. And on the slide in front of you, you've got kind of four common mistakes that we've seen fairly frequently. So the top one is fairly self-explanatory, particularly with everyday complexity. People kind of see frustrating administration, bureaucracy, meetings with tens of people in them, email chains that go on for days and days and days, management reporting that really suggests of analysis paralysis. And the real temptation is to run quickly at swinging the sword, if you like, at each of those problems. And while sometimes simplifying the way information is reporting by looking at the kind of report itself and thinking, well, what actually do we need, does seem to have some value, and it can do. Unless you're really understanding what's driving that complexity, it will come back. It'll be a short-term fix for a much deeper problem. The second one is people not being comfortable challenging the behaviors of senior people in the organization. And quite often, leaders and managers are real proprietors of complexity. They're ones that are actually creating complexity into the organization. And it's not easy to have a candid conversation with very senior people and in a constructive way, telling them that they are, creating unnecessary work for the organization. That takes quite a brave person to be able to do that, or a fairly robust process. So many people shy away from those difficult conversations, and consequently, the real root causes of complexity are not properly dealt with. Some organizations are using the wrong toolkit, or worse still, no toolkit at all. So Lean is a good example. We're big fans of Lean. Lean is very, very effective for many different instances of inefficiency in processes and looking to reduce waste. But it's not a tool that was designed to, on its own, to look at the root causes of everyday complexity. So it'll get you so far, but it won't get you to the whole answer. And sometimes when an organization has invested in a toolkit like Lean or like Six Sigma, then there's a bit of an over-reliance on that toolkit and a perspective that actually it can solve every single organizational problem, when in actual fact it can't. And then the final one is one that we see kind of very, very, very often, which is because everyday complexity is something we can all relate to, we all suffer from. Many of us actually kind of create it for ourselves and the people that work in our organizations. We therefore think that it's really easy. And the reality is it's not. It's very, very, very difficult to change because it's so prevalent. The culture that supports it is very, very, very difficult to change. People have been having bloated meetings for years and years and years. Since the advent of email has grown and grown and grown. So it's not easy to change these things. They are difficult to change, but it is possible. And through the remainder of this session, we will take you through how. So we thought it would be quite helpful just to share some of the examples of where everyday complexity comes from. Now, obviously, there are root causes of root causes. So, as an example, growth, whether that's organic or M&A, the macro structure of an organization, the number of markets it serves, the number of strategic priorities it's got on at that time, its relationship with the regulator. All of these things can actually be cause of causes. But here, these are some of the things that we see frequently in our clients as real drivers of unnecessary email, of unnecessary meetings, of complex management reporting, complex processes, complex organizational administration. So these are the lens that we would encourage leaders and managers coming on our programs to really look at the complexity through. And again, with the setup up front here, bearing in mind what this toolkit is designed for, this is giving leaders and managers the opportunity to go and really dig for roots of everyday complexity. We wouldn't necessarily expect a manager to go and have a frank conversation with their board about the organization's M&A strategy over the coming 2 years, because there was a fear that post-merger integration was going to create duplicated work, and that was going to create complexity. And whilst there is some validity in that argument, we need to be very clear on what we're trying to solve here. And for this particular frame, these are some of the most common root causes that we've seen. So without further ado, we will jump into the process. And as you can see in front of you, there are 6 steps. And this will take you from the symptom of everyday complexity right the way through to a refined problem statement for which real solutions can be designed for. Now, steps 1 and 2 are in a different colour for a reason. These two are about identifying the complexity. And if you think back to the earlier slide, this is all about creating the hit list. Those two are in a different colour. And then steps 3, 4, 5, and 6 are actually then about digging for the sources, the root causes, once we've got the complexity that's in scope for us to simplify. The first of these steps is to identify symptoms. And this is not difficult to do. I'd imagine that anybody joining this live or watching the recording will have plenty of examples of what they feel could be simpler in their organisation. What we do is we would recommend using some provocative frames. So, what frustrates you, what wastes your time, what gets in the way of what's important, whether you think that the organisation is wasting money. They can all be quite helpful. And at this stage, what we're really looking to do is to get as many ideas as possible. So as with any idea generation exercise or innovation process, at the top end of this process, we're looking for quantity over quality. We would encourage people to be as brief as possible. We don't need rambling rants at this stage. We're just looking to get ideas on the table. So keeping them to a tweet can be a good idea, or providing post-it notes. So actually we're looking to keep these ideas represented and covered in a very brief way. And the other thing that we really insist on with clients is actually getting people to talk about complexity and the symptom at an activity level. And that is really important, because all complexity manifests in organizations as activity. It just needs to be looked at through that lens. So if you can do that, then you can really start to quantify it, which we'll come on to shortly, but also do something about it. It becomes very tangible. And then the final point there is there's no real right way of doing this. We've seen each of these examples used effectively in an organization. So depending on how you are geographically situated, depending on what works in your organization in terms of surveys or email, ironically, then think of a way that's simplest for you to engage a good conversation between your leaders, your managers, and the people that they manage and lead, to generate as many of these ideas as possible. On the right hand side, we've got 3 examples that were created by a sales manager, and we will take these examples through this process. So once we've identified the symptoms, the next stage is to quantify them and then to qualify them. So why do we want to quantify? Well, organizational performance is measured by metrics, and complexity is no different to this. The most accessible and commonly used metrics we tend to find are looking at complexity through time, through money, and you can quite easily convert time into money by a loaded cost multiple, or frustration and employee engagement. For this particular webinar, we will use time. This is kind of mirroring the approach we've used recently with a global telco, where we were looking for opportunities to free up time to do more strategic activity like innovation and sales. So we'll take that process through this webinar. And you'll see here we've got in the left-hand column under symptom, we've got the 3 examples that we introduced on the previous page. In the column next to that, we're asking the originator of these ideas to actually estimate how many hours per person per week each of these ideas waste. And you can quite easily do that by considering them yourself, or thinking about the people you work with or the teams that you've got. And then doing a very rough estimate on the number of people affected by the complexity. So here for this particular example, we're looking at a medium-sized sales function. But this number in this column could be your entire organization. In some cases, it could just be you and a peer. It could be you and your team. So the idea behind this whole process is we give a framework, but actually you provide the context and the fill, so that you can end up creating solutions for complexity that is real for you and your part of the organization. And then to the right-hand side, very obviously, it's just one column times by the other to give an overall impact of the complexity on the organization. So it's not enough just to select which complexity to address based on the quantifiable impact. Whilst there is some sense in going after complexity which is harming you the most, clearly in organisations other factors need to be considered, and to ensure that context is played into this process, we recommend having a set of questions to further probe the opportunities that have kind of made it into this process. So here we've got three for simplicity. So one's around the ability to influence change. Have I got it? Can I get it? The second is the gain worth the pain? And all change, and simplicity is no different, has a cost to it because we're looking to put in effort. And then the third one on this particular instance is to guard against inertia and apathy, just putting a real honest lens on, actually, am I going to make this change happen? Let's not go complaining about something really big in the organization and then not really have the motivation to go and actually change that. So an example might be, wouldn't it be wise to try and go to simplify a particularly painful feature of a CRM in an organization if we knew that the organization already had plans to change that CRM 3 months down the line? That would just be futile effort and a complete waste of time. So bringing this level of qualification is very helpful for ensuring that we end up trying to solve the right things. And needless to say, less is more in simplicity. So we would strongly encourage leaders and managers who are taking this process to the complexity that they see to really focus on fewer opportunities, get those delivered, and then go back and tackle some of the other ideas that were generated earlier on in the process. We then move on to step 3, and this is a cause and effect model which many people would have seen. Anybody working in continuous improvement or consulting or Lean or Six Sigma or Kaizen would have come across something like this. What we're trying to do here is get to the cause of the causes. What's actually driving the symptom and what is actually driving that? So quite simply, in the symptom or effect box at the top, we're articulating the symptom that we came up with in step 1, qualified and quantified in step 2. And then what we're looking to do is ask what's driving that. So many people would have come across 5 whys or 3 whys or however many whys. What we're looking to do is ask what's driving that, what's driving that, what's driving that. Now, for simplicity and for this webinar, we're going to go down to 2 levels. But actually, in reality, you should go down to as many levels as you really need. So that could be more than 3 sub boxes on the horizontal level, and that could be more than 2 levels on the vertical level. So again, this is a guiding toolkit. This isn't the absolute template for every different instance of everyday complexity out there. So here we've asked what's causing this problem. We would recommend trying to keep this as mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive as possible, so no overlapping. But we would recommend being kind of very pragmatic here. We don't need to kind of over-engineer this. We're not suggesting that every manager and leader in your organizations are McKinsey management consultants who are going to be very adept at issue-based problem solving and the issue tree. So be sensible with this, but where there's obvious overlap, then challenge yourselves to ensure that is eradicated as much as possible. So we can see here we've got three sub-drivers, so a lack of questioning about what the report's used for, a mindset in the organization that the more data is the better, and actually not creating enough time to find a simpler way to produce the report. So less about its design and more about the process for collating the information. And once we've got to these three root causes, we would then go down individually again and actually try and get under the skin of what's actually driving the first set of causes. And again, go through one at a time. We want people to ask better questions here about actually what is driving this complexity and really starting to get under the skin of the strands of the problem. And again, here you can see some very different and deeper perspectives on the problem than we see at the very top level under the symptom. This ends up kind of creating a mind map of all of the issues driving the problem. And once we've got that, we then move on to the fourth step, which is the me, myself, and I tool. Now, in our experience, it's kind of too easy for managers and leaders just to blame the organization. It's just the way it's done around here, or it's just the culture, we're just complex, or it's the regulator, or our customers are changing so quickly. What leaders and managers can sometimes be bad at doing is turning the lens on themselves and actually seeing what role are they playing in either creating this complexity or not doing enough to drive simplicity. So this question really is about them having a very honest look at themselves and seeing what role they are playing. Now that's important because this introduces the point that complexity exists in organizations because of behaviors and mindsets and the decisions that people are taking. When we come to engaging others in the organization about simplifying, and that comes later on in this process, and in fact on a subsequent webinar, this becomes really important because it enables us to say as leaders and managers, look, we're aware that we're not perfect in this and we're actually playing a part in either going along with it or worse still kind of creating the complexity for the people that we are leading and managing. But you know what, we're aware of it and we're trying to do something about that. It also means that when we come to the solution implementation, we'll be clear on how important changing behaviors is, not just in ourselves, but in other people in the organization as well. So following on from that strand, as well as ourselves, we want to look at behaviors in a broader sense. We want to look at behaviors right across the organization. We can start to see what the prevailing culture is that's creating everyday complexity. So these are 5 behaviors that we use with clients. And again, with the telco, we use these 5, but actually you wouldn't have to use these 5. If you've got your own behaviors, your own values, your own core competencies, then those could be used. And it's quite easy to frame those in a provocative way to really challenge, are they creating complexity in the organization? So clarity, are we communicating the important things clearly? Well, if we're not doing that, then it's no surprise that we've got people working on stuff that doesn't matter. If we're not focused on the most important things, then it wouldn't be a massive surprise that we've got volume complexity. We've got people trying to do too much of the same thing or too many different things. So these are really designed to ensure that we get a sense of what's driving complexity at a behavioral level in the organization. And again, that's really important for when we come to design solutions, when we come to look for ideas for simplifying. If we know what the organization needs, then we've got a much better chance of designing something which is going to stand up when we come to implement it. And then the final step is wrapping up the thinking in steps 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then getting to a refined problem statement in step 6. So that looks to cover elements of steps 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2, 3, 4, and 5, so that when we come to the next stage of getting the white pad out and starting to sketch out ideas for simplicity, we've actually got an informed summary to go off. And again, that's really important. So we're really designing for what will last and what the organisation needs, as opposed to what we think it would. So that refined problem statement marks the end of this process, and that is what we take forward into the next phase. The next step is for leaders and managers to design simpler ways of working. So you can see it in the Discover box under the Identify workshop. In this particular product, we've got the step of actually designing the simplicity, and that could either be a tweak, or it could actually be starting again from a zero base. How we will design that will be covered in the subsequent sessions. So we're talking about how we simplify meetings, how we simplify email, how we simplify reporting, processes, procedures, what other organisations are doing. So we won't spoil that now in the interest of time. But that's what comes up next in that Identify workshop. There's a lot of stimulus from what the world's leading and simplest organisations are doing to change the way they work. We thought it would be helpful just to finish off by sharing the case study that we've mentioned a couple of times on this webinar. So the global telco, the result of using this tool as part of the wider toolkit is that each manager that went through this program, and you can see a couple of them on the right hand side, managed to create plans, so not even identify, they identified and created plans to create an average of 1,140 hours per year through simplification. That's either money that can come out of the business if there is a cost-saving prerogative or initiative, which there wasn't here. This was about capacity. So we've actually managed to free up a load of time that the organisation can then better deploy to things like innovation and sales. And examples from that program included stopping the reporting of unnecessary information. There was colossal amounts of time being wasted on reporting information that the organisation didn't need. And we're simplifying some processes and procedures. And again, one of the big examples from this cohort of managers was actually looking at how we simplify local pre-sales qualification so as not to duplicate a process that came further down the line. So not only was there commercial impact for the organisation, managers actually really loved this program. They found it cathartic to think about all of the complex things that really frustrated them in the organisation, and then being given the permission by the business to actually do something about that in a very safe environment. So we'll get into more of this detail on the next webinar, which conveniently will be coming in January 2017. So that's where we'll start to provide the think aids. So how do you simplify some of the things that we've covered on the call that are in front of you here, learning from the likes of Amazon and Ferrari and other organizations as to what they're doing. So keep an eye on our website, on our Twitter feed, on Stop Press, our newsletter, and we will share more information on that webinar in January. So we've got time for just a couple of quick questions that we've been asked around this topic. So we've been asked a couple of times kind of what level in an organization would this be suitable for? And the answer to that question is we've designed it to be as inclusive as possible. So right away from senior leaders to first-line managers and even graduates. So we believe the process stands up with each of those groups of people. They can decide to bring whatever complexity they want into that process. So a senior leader might have the ability to influence more change than a graduate, but actually it wouldn't intellectually take a lot more brain power to use the process. So it's been designed to be as inclusive as possible. We've been asked about would this approach work for large instances of organizational complexity, and by that people mean kind of organization design, end-to-end cross-functional processes, product portfolios, what we take to the market. And the answer to that question is it really just depends on what those issues are. So, you know, local, low-level organization design issues, I would say yes. If it comes to, you know, changing the way a whole organization makes decisions, then no. Some of the tools we might deploy as part of that approach, but it would really be a kind of horses for courses type of thinking from us in the organization. So really an acid test is to, honestly, do we think that this is gonna solve the problem at hand? But for many things, and particularly the everyday complexity, this toolkit does work, as we've seen at the telco and elsewhere. But sometimes more depth will be required, you know, process mapping, quantifying effort into a process. You know, we're not going to have time to do that in a leadership or management development workshop. If you want to get in touch, we'd love to hear from you by email, by phone, over the web, or via Twitter. Do get in touch with any questions. We'd love to kind of widen this debate. And all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for joining the webinar today.